So, like many of my stories, this one's a little sad. Just keep in mind, it is living through this that made me who I am. And I'm making this video honestly just so that you can get to know me a little better. And it's also a way of me accepting my life and my past and my experiences. My parents, my mom and dad, they fell in love over a over the Mexico James Taylor album. He went to my mom's house, I think, to visit her friend, and her friend wasn't home, or maybe it was the other way around and my mom went there. But he ended up inviting her in, and they spent the entire night listening to the James Taylor Mexico album. And that's when they fell in love. And then they met in Arlington, Virginia, where my mom was born and raised, and where I've lived most of my life, or thereabouts. And my dad had moved to Arlington as a teenager. He originally, and my grandmother are from upstate New York, Ellenville to be exact. Anyway, so eventually they got married, and at the wedding, they were going to get married at their house, and my mom wore what looked to be curtains or some sort of drapery, and they were going to get married on the porch, so they had the wedding party standing on the balcony, and all the guests were in the yard looking at the ceremony. And just before they were about to get married, the porch caved in, somebody fell through and broke his leg, but my mom insisted on going ahead with the wedding, so I think they got married on the stairs. Anyway, so then came me, not right after, but pretty soon after. And I was born exactly a week before Christmas. And they named me Jessica Gray Schipp. Thank God for my dad, because my mom wanted to name me either Misty or Dusty, which reminds me of a Chinkapin horse. My middle name, Jessica, let's start there. Jessica means the grace of the Lord, which is sort of ironic because I've been told that I was bossy from the start. My middle name comes from my dad. His name was Gary, and he was dyslexic, so he would write it Gray, and he gave me the name. So 2 years later came my little sister, and simultaneously my parents got divorced. My mom left when she was pregnant, I believe, and we moved in with my grandparents while my mom sorted out what was next, and I think she was finishing nursing school. Eventually, my Aunt Katie, we moved to Fairlington, and my Aunt Katie helped to raise us, and she lived with us for a few years, which she was a magical aunt. So I have a lot of I don't really remember those times because I was very young, and yet, I was probably 4 to 6, that age range, somewhere. Probably a little, maybe like between 2 and 4 or so. So anyway, Katie helped to raise us. When I was 6, I got home from school and I hit the button on the voicemail machine, which back in the day you actually had to have like a machine that you plugged into your house phone, and it could record voice messages from people. So anyway, I hit play, and it was my grandfather asking my mom to call him, and Mom called him, and long story short, my dad was dead, which was really something. And pretty quickly after he died, we moved to Bath, Maine. I think it was really hard for my mom to be around my family at the time. He died of alcoholism, which I didn't find out till I was older, actually. Originally, I believed he died from pneumonia. I think I found out in therapy as a teenager that it was alcoholism, but Anyway, we moved to Bath, Maine, and I lived there from when I was 6 to when I was 9. And it was a pretty magical place. It was actually, I think, a great choice. I got to play in a creek and catch frog eggs. And they're like sacks, jelly sacks. They're really cool. And I just remember it being a really happy place. So growing up, my sister and I fought a lot. After my dad died, I was a really, really angry kid, and I was super mean to my mom and super mean to my sister, and I feel really bad about that. My childhood summers were spent primarily just outside. We grew up it depended on where we were living, but pretty much every summer of my life I would end up at the beach. We had a little house in Rhode Island, and or like a little cottage, and a little like timeshare rental with my grandparents' friends in Rehoboth, and so we would always go there. I feel like I was raised at the beach every summer of my life. And we'd also go camping a lot. My mom always arrives after dark and would pitch the tent in the dark, and it would just irritate me so deeply. But I thank my mom for those things because it's made me the organized, planning kind of person that I am, which has been a strength for me. So, let's see. My mom worked a lot, so I had a lot of time for creativity and turning my friends into family and occupying myself. And I've always loved to rearrange my bedroom. Anyway, so we lived in Maine, and then we moved back to Arlington in 1993. I would think it was fourth grade. Yeah, it was fourth grade for me, and I met one of my dearest friends, Sabrina, and we kind of just like roamed this little neighborhood with a bunch of other kids, and it was really, honestly, picturesque. I think my home life wasn't always that easy, but the environment in which I was raised in was really particularly special and magical and gentle and a beautiful setting for a childhood. I did things like instead of selling lemonade, I set up a stand out front of my house and sold greeting cards and packets of confetti that I would hand punch. I guess I've always had an entrepreneurial sort of spark within me. So walking dogs in that neighborhood, which was also Fairlington, my mom bumped into my stepdad, my future stepdad, while they were walking dogs. And when I was 15, they ended up getting married. And I remember when he proposed, my mom came to me and said, if you girls aren't okay with this, I won't marry him. And I just remember how sad she was, and my sister and I just agreed, and I'm so grateful. Like today, I'm so grateful for that. And I think it was so sweet of her as a single parent to consider us like that. That was important. So anyways, she got remarried when I was 15, and with that came a little stepbrother who was 10, and I did not know what to do with a 10-year-old boy. He used to constantly come and hassle me when I was hanging out with my friends doing cool activities on the trampoline. And I got a stepdad. And he never really tried to be a stepdad, which was the right choice because I had an attitude and would not have accepted that. And dads are a really sensitive subject to me. I only got one for 6 years, and so I didn't want anybody to replace that in my life at the time. And my stepdad was really good about not pushing me. So we got along fine. Around the same time I met my first real boyfriend. And I think at this point I kind of started turning my anger inward. Whereas before I'd taken a lot of it out on my mom and Maggie, I really began taking it out on myself at this point. And I hesitate to say this because I would never want anyone watching this to follow in my footsteps, but I also feel compelled to be very honest because this is my story and it's the truth. So I'm gonna say the truth, but please don't do anything that I already made the mistake doing, okay? I can learn for all of us. But I started turning my anger inward, and I became bulimic. And during that time was experiencing my first roller coaster of a serious relationship and being in love for the first time. And also when I was 15, I got arrested for shoplifting. And luckily I came from a family who was able to help me get out of that. My grandfather had to save me. My mom couldn't pay for the lawyer because I had gotten a felony, actually. And we were able to get it reduced to a misdemeanor and then extinguished or expunged from my record, thank God. But yeah, so I was obviously, it's kind of funny because it's only in telling this to you that I see this very clearly for myself. I was struggling a lot at 15. Those were a lot of changes, and yeah, so a lot of things started happening. And then after high school, I graduated, and I took this really random last-minute road trip up to, I think it was Rehoboth, the beach, and stayed over for the night with a couple of friends, and my Aunt Katie was there, and I just saw her, and I said I loved her and gave her a big kiss, and I think she was leaving early the next morning, so that was all I saw of her. But that was the last time I saw her. And she ended up going to Wyoming to go on this hiking trip, and she died in her sleep of altitude sickness. So that was a huge shock to my family. It changed the entire structure of my family, my mom's extended family, all my aunts and uncles. It was really heartbreaking, and she had been such an integral part of raising me that it was unbelievable. I just couldn't believe that both my dad and my aunt, who replaced my dad in essence, could be gone, but they were. So anyway, life moves on. I went to college in Richmond with one of my bestest, oldest friends, Lisa. We both got into their photography program, which was really awesome because it was super competitive. And eventually I moved into art education. I was just curious about other forms of art. And I met my first boyfriend and I had broken up eventually. And I started dating somebody else and made a lot of mistakes and slept with many of my guy friends and hurt people and learned a lot of, made a lot of mistakes, learned a lot. It was in college that I started oil painting, which I think transformed the way that I see the world. Everything was different from that point on. I met a couple of people. I'm struggling because there's some people's names I want to leave out, and there's some people's names that, you know, I met Jess and Noelle and Danielle, and they were such good friends of mine. And in fact, Danielle actually called me out on on my eating disorder, and thanks to her, I actually got counseling for the first time and began, first time that was unenforced. I had been forced into therapy many times. I was forced into therapy after my dad died. My mom forced me to therapy after I got the shoplifting arrested for that. But this was the first time that I chose therapy. And it was transformational. It was transformational, and it was absolutely necessary. So I will always be grateful to my friend for just being upfront with me. So I graduated in 2008 with a bachelor's of fine arts in art education, and I was not ready to teach. I just wasn't ready. So I ended up, my grandparents were at their beach house in Rhode Island, and they were going to be gone for 6 weeks, so they lent me their apartment, and I moved in. And within that period of time, I ended up getting my first real job in the midst of the 2008 recession, and I got my first apartment that I was paying for myself with money I was making, and I started my first real job. So the first thing I did is I immediately signed up for a retirement class and a first-time home buyers class. I spent my time there taking a lot of professional development classes because there were a lot of opportunities and because I wasn't entirely that interested in my position. So I used the time to just build my knowledge, and I got certified as a Microsoft application expert. And it's ironic because, although that was 2010, that was 10 years ago, that certification helped me get the job that I have today. So a short time after all of those things happened, I met my next partner, and we moved in together, and it was a very, very rocky relationship. And it became clear to me that it was not, I did not want to marry him, and I did not want to have children with him, and it was toxic. So, but in between figuring that out, I'd gotten into grad school, which he'd been very supportive of, and I accepted and started studying business at MICA to get my master's. And about halfway through the program, what I would call it is got divorced, because it sort of felt like it. We had really blended our lives. And I ended up moving in with another friend of mine, which also ended badly. And eventually I quit my job to finish grad school full time. And then I sort of hit the road to try and start my own business, which my focus was sort of organizing artist studios. So my first stop, I went up to upstate New York, and I organized the studio of my friend Jen, for her business, Reflect Jen. And then I went to Williamsburg for about a month to manage Katie Didrikson, a painter. I worked in trade. She gave me food and shelter, and I just got her organized. And then I went on to Bloomington, Indiana to kind of streamline my friend Alicia's company, Mustafa Pie Company. I had met all of these people during grad school, and then they hired me on, so it was this weird, I was just going with it. Boom, boom, boom. And I arrived in Bloomington very, very sick. And Alicia, who is my friend to the end of this story, and I talk to her every day. But anyway, she forced me to go to the ER because I looked so sick. She was like, "You're not okay, you have to go." And it turned out my body was failing me. I had styes in my eyes. I was completely swollen and puffy. I had hives all over my body. I couldn't breathe. It was really bad. So they prescribed me 14 days of prednisone, and I was convinced that I either had cancer or it had to be food allergies. There were no other options. So Once again, I had to move home because I could not actually continue to work in that condition. So I moved, not once again, this is the first time I really had to move back home. I moved back into my mom's house, and I spent 11 months trying to learn how to live with all my food allergies and trying to figure out my next step. And somehow I stumbled upon AmeriCorps and got this really cool job trying to put creativity back into classrooms. It was like hands-on. They were calling it making. I didn't really know what was happening, but it sounded super cool, and it was in a school, so it kind of tied in all my background. So I packed up my little Honda Civic and I drove to Oakland. I took primarily the northern route, but I had a really crazy map with 33 destination points, and my buddy David came. I flew him out, and he, honestly, if I'm being honest, he basically drove me across the country. We went to places like the Field of Dreams and let's see, California. So I got to Oakland. I lived in San Francisco for a couple of months. Well, I found a place in Oakland, and I ended up finding a place, thank goodness, through David. He saved me. And I moved in with 5 other roommates. And I lived that way for 5 years, all 5 years that I was in California. The first thing that always comes to mind was the food. The food, California food, is so amazing. For the first time in my life, I would go to little barbecue get-together potlucks in the woods. People would bring salads with edible flowers. My roommate once slaughtered a goat and tried to hang it in the bathroom, which infuriated me. So I took all my clothes off my clothes rack, gave it to him, and I said, if you insist on hanging a goat, you can do so in your room, and you can use this if you sanitize it when you're done. People were smoking weed on the streets. It was just total submersion in nothing but culture. No particular culture, but nothing but culture. It was an amazing, amazing, amazing time. And eventually I started dating somebody new, who actually I lived with. Ladies, not a good choice. Not a good choice. Yeah, we didn't really start dating. I just thought we were friends at first, and one night he kissed me and I pushed him away, and I said absolutely not, 100% no. And I said, I want to have kids and a family. You don't want those things. And he pursued me. He pursued me and he won. And also during that time, I again started going to another therapist. This time I found an art therapist, which was actually a field of study that I'd always been very interested in. And, you know, I've always used my art as a form of therapy, so that was an interesting battle. I basically 99% of the time refused to do art therapy with her. But the few times that I did sandbox play and I did a couple of paintings and a couple of drawings, they were really powerful experiences. She ultimately finally diagnosed me with GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorder. And she also helped me realize and come into the fact that my mom and my sister are both bipolar, and I guess the only thing I would say about that is I was just so relieved when she diagnosed me with generalized anxiety, because I was so terrified she was going to diagnose me with depression, and that was sort of my worst fear, because I've seen so much depression in my life with my mom and with my sister. But typically when I'm upset or feeling depressed, it's I don't want to blame them, but their states really have an effect on me. So about halfway through my time in California, my grandmother died, and this is Grandma Donna, and we'd been so close. We'd been pen pals my whole life. So it was shocking. to say the least. But, and a short while after that, we inherited a little bit of money. My sister chose to move out to Oregon. During that time, I helped her drive out there. And she ended up starting to use meth when she moved out there, so that was a little complicated. And then I, about the same time, decided to invest the money that I'd inherited into Allergic to Everything. #Allergic to Everything, my book that it's a cookbook, and my friend Phil suggested I make a cookbook once he saw I used to have this journal, try to put a picture in, but I wrote it during my summers off, and because I had finally figured out how to live with all my allergens, but now I was finding out like what tastes really good, what are really good recipes, and I just started writing them down because I needed them. I couldn't find any books like this one, and there still aren't any on the market quite like it. So I decided to quit my job, and my partner really supported me in that, and I was so grateful. For the first time in my life, I really felt supported, like somebody just had my back no matter what, and somebody saw me and believed in me and believed in my dreams. And I think to a degree I believed in myself in those dreams too, but yeah, so I worked my butt off for about 16 months, invested the savings that I had, which was like $30,000, and I managed to raise over $31,000 on Kickstarter, and it got $0 because if you don't hit your full funding goal, you get nothing. So coming very close and failing was horrifically heartbreaking. Now, minutes prior to the launch, I would say I went through what is like a second divorce from my partner, who had supported me so much at the beginning of this project. But things had gotten crazy, and I was dealing with a lot of family stuff. So I wasn't the perfect partner. And I was also really disappointed that he chose to leave, that he gave up. That's what upset me the most, because if my story is about anything, it's about resilience, and I always bounce back, and I always find my way through. Anyway, so all of those terrible things happened. It was a terrible time, and I decided I'm going to get a dog. So I drove out to Modesto. It was about an hour and a half, and just before I left, I remembered the lady had said to bring a box, and I was like, oh my God, and I had like 5 boxes. I didn't know which size box I would need. I didn't know. So at the last second, I remembered I had my Aunt Katie's LL Bean tote bag that had her name written on it, and I also had an epiphany, and I was like, oh my God, if this is my dog, her name is Katie, named after my aunt. And sure enough, I got there, and she was. And there's a whole nother story that goes with that. So I drove, eventually, after all of those losses and everything, I decided to move back to Arlington. Honestly, I was out of funds, and I didn't know what to do, and I was very depressed, and I'd lost everything, and I felt like a failure, and I needed to pick myself back up again. So I took the southern route, best route, so beautiful, highly recommend it. Just Katie and I drove, and we moved in with my parents again, hopefully, knock on wood, for the last time. And I picked up a little work nannying for my friend Grace, and eventually I got the job that I have now, and I'm teaching business and information systems. Basically, that just means computers. And I have the apartment that I've been dying for all these years, and I built the life that I've wanted for all these years. And I have it, and it's here, and it's tangible, and it's beautiful. But also in the first full-time, in my first full-time year as a licensed teacher, of course, coronavirus closed down schools and I had to start teaching from home. What I learned this year, I love my job. I loved it, but living in isolation has been so hard. Teaching in this environment is so hard. There's so much to learn. And I love a challenge though, so I'm up for it. But the isolation part is extreme. And with my anxiety disorder, I'm just having it's just a lot. I'm just anxious about really everything right now. So meanwhile, when the world shut down, my parents also told me that they're thinking about separating and that they're in different bedrooms. At one point, I went over and helped move my mom's dresser into a different bedroom. So that was really tricky, tough, hard. And recently, my sister just actually moved back with her boyfriend, and they've moved in with my parents. So it's an interesting house now. But my sister seems to be doing good, and I'm just grateful, like I've told them, that they have a house that's big enough for the space they need from each other and to keep everybody safe right now in these current conditions. So their house is pretty full. I'm 35 today, halfway through it, just about, and I've been afraid of commitment. If you look at the history of who I've chosen to date, I think that's the conclusion that can be made. I was really, really afraid that I'd mess everything up, afraid that I'd be a bad mom or have kids who ended up living through the types of trauma I have. It took me many, many years of self-exploration and therapy and research to realize that I've been very afraid of the thing I wanted most. I'd never seen it exist. I had no example. Sometimes it's hard to believe in what you cannot see. Today, I'm certain that I got some of my genes from my grandma Donna and my dad. And I think those genes are obviously blended with my mom's side. And I know today that I can make a great, great mom, and I'd be a great wife. And there's nothing I love more than putting on a family feast and making holidays magical. So today, I know the things I want most in life are to own a home and to have a family of my own. And I don't feel afraid or unprepared anymore. I feel ready. And I finally just published #allergictoeverything, the first edition. And my friend Alicia, who I mentioned earlier, thinks I could write a book with all of this, and maybe one day I will. But today, I'm just going to make a video with it. Thank you guys for watching. I'm going to start doing some more kinds of like about me videos.